I hope everybody is doing well on this good and fine day. So, in this video, we are going to be talking about the game design of Chapter 2, as I promised in the introduction. Specifically, we'll be talking about the level design though. In order to figure out what my maps were supposed to look like, firstly, I figured out the story of Chapter 2. I introduced all the specifics, the side quests and stuff, but that's not interesting. I got into the sketching of all of the maps in Chapter 2. I'll show the screenshots on the video over here. As you can see, a lot of them have a bunch of shapes going on. That's for two reasons. Firstly, because I want to experiment with my artistic vision or whatever, and I want to cut off the linearity of the maps in the early access game that I have. That is going to be released on June 7th. There's like 5 days left, so yeah, stay tuned for that. The second reason was to embody the aesthetic of the Soviet Union in the 40s. There was this whole very popular art style going on, especially in those patriotic posters, called constructivism, which relied a lot on geometry and just basic shapes like triangles, stuff like that, just to show the strength of the Soviet Union at the time, you know? Like, you see a big triangle or a square and you feel like, wow, these people are really strong or something. Obviously, in the maps that had more action and tension, let's say you're getting chased by an enemy, I did not experiment with the visuals as much because I don't want to overwhelm the player. But for maps where you need to problem solve or like look for a specific object to progress the story, I made the maps a lot more visually experimental. I'm also planning to warp the player visually too when they walk through certain scenes and stuff, because it's just more interesting and I really like that. But for this video specifically, we're going to focus on the map in Yerevan. The player is first transported into this map after a very big fight with their uncle, who is coincidentally the leader of the cat cult you're supposed to fight against. I'm not going to get into it to not spoil things too much, but basically this is the first map in Chapter 2 that you fall into, and you're completely confused and you don't know what you're doing, and it's just this completely different world from the world you were born in, which is supposed to be inspired by 1910s Constantinople. Jesus. So the first ever draft I made was very messy and sketchy, but there were a couple of things that I absolutely had in mind that I wanted to visualize. So firstly, I want to have, I guess, a sort of 3D feel to the game. I want there to be 3 separate layers for this map specifically: the underground, the actual city, the midground, and then the foreground, I guess, which is tubes that you can stand on to look down at the city. I experimented with the shapes and stuff to keep in line with the whole aesthetic of constructivism. And I also had some other ideas, like having a metro that transports you from one side of the city to the other, because again, it's a big map. But yeah, not really much to say about this. I was just gaffing and goofing, I guess, with this sketch. But with the second one, I got a little more concrete with it. I added 2 big statues of 2 ladies holding hands. I added this because this was like a very prominent aesthetic. I thought this was a very important part of the Soviet Union, especially since I read this book about women in the USSR and how, although men were, I guess, the head of the family symbolically, women were usually the breadwinners in the houses. They were usually the ones working hard and like really pushing their careers. Obviously, this is not true for every single family, but that was the trend. So I really wanted to, I guess, how do you say it? I forgot. Represent the independence of women in the Soviet Union. I also added some other little cute things, like the freaking kukuruznik, which we had. For those who don't know, it was like this like student hangout place back in the Soviet Union. I added some other cool visual effects. I had added a factory, which was very important for Armenia at the time because they were one of the biggest industrial producers in the USSR. One of the things that they produced the most and the best were chemicals. And then on the other side, I added a university. I was happy with this draft, so I went immediately to finalizing the sketch. And then I saw again, like, one of my main objectives was to break away from that linearity of the maps, and I felt like that was happening again in this map. So I tried to break that off by having certain tunnels and staircases that when you walk down those, you will go to a completely different point of the map. So I wanted to add that element of surprise and critical thinking, spatial thinking on the part of the viewer. So now that I'm done explaining the sketches, I went over to Procreate, which is my favorite drawing app, and I finalized the sketches. I went over to Unity after this and I played around with the planes and stuff. Once I changed the main camera view to perspective, I was able to see the player move backwards and forwards through the planes. So yes, I can implement that idea. Awesome. That's like one really cool thing about Unity, is that you can play with like 3D stuff in the 2D renderer. Once that was done, I added in all of my artwork and sorted things. Alright, so once I got that stuff sorted out, I noticed a couple of icky things that were going on that I needed to fix if I wanted the map to look pretty and I guess realistic in a sense. Firstly, the issue with using the sorting layers to sort the way that sprites are rendered and clipped and stuff is that when I'm going to use the universal render pipeline to add lighting to the maps, I made everything in the underground layer on the same background layer, for example. For that, I'm either going to have to find a new way to render these sprites using the universal render pipeline itself, or I'll have to make like a ton of different sorting layers in Unity, which I feel like would be a bit redundant. I haven't figured that out yet, but that's just something to keep in mind for when I start working on lighting on this map. Secondly, when I move between foreground, midground, and background, there needs to be a distinction in color between the three. So I added two placeholder sprites in between these two layers. For example, between the foreground and midground, I added a semi-white plane to symbolize clouds and the fading of color when you reach a higher altitude. So yeah, it's just a much prettier touch that, you know, prevents the player from straining their eyes too. I also realized that the closer you get to the camera, the faster you should be moving. I also tweaked the speed of the player depending on which layer they were on. So I think that's it for this video. Basically, that's what I've done this week. And in the next video, I will be working on actually polishing the map, adding it in Unity, adding NPCs and walk cycles and stuff. So yeah, we'll see how all of that works out. It's gonna be super exciting. Thank you for watching. And again, if you want to see anything specific, please comment down below. Love you guys.